Hello everyone and welcome back to Sonic Unleashed Werehog Stages for more Werehog Stages. Welcome to Werehog Stages, Sonic Unleashed 4 Werehog Stages in Sonic Unleashed Werehog Stages. Werehog Stages in Sonic Unleashed Werehog Stages for Werehog Stages in Sonic Unleashed Werehog Stages for Werehog Stages, Sonic Unleashed Stages, Werehog Stages, Night Stage, Werehog Stage, Sonic Unleashed. So basically what I'm getting at here is that for the majority of these levels there's not a lot to talk about. I like the aesthetic, I like the atmosphere, and I suppose it's kind of cute how there's a constant aurora borealis in the sky, but at the same time it seems weird that it's just always there. Anyway, because there's so little to talk about and this stage is so painfully generic, we're instead going to talk about other Sonic game design again, this time something a little bit different. A while back, I looked at a 3D Sonic fan game called Sonic World, and my overall analysis was that, although it's a fine game on its own, it didn't stand up in comparison to actual 3D Sonic games. It didn't have as much rhythm, the level design was underwhelming, and it controlled fine, but not as well as normal Sonic games would. I decided to give it another go, and at first my previous assessment seemed correct. The game seemed like it didn't control nearly as well as other 3D Sonic games, up to and including Sonic 06, which is saying something. In fact, I would say my tolerance for Sonic World on the whole was even less than it was in my first impression, where I was generally positive about it. But I spent a little more time with it, and after about 30 minutes to an hour of getting used to it, the game seemed to control just fine. I had no trouble making really tricky jumps after a bit of practice. And it's the same kind of practice that you'd need to get used to controlling Sonic Unleashed, really. When you're moving a character that fast in 3D space, it can seem kinda janky at first. And I suppose because I'd been playing the other 3D Sonic games so long, I'd just gotten used to the way those control. And didn't give Sonic World adequate time to grow on me. So after giving it a fair shake, I don't know if I could say it controls better or worse than the other 3D Sonic games, just that it controls differently. It handles moving fast in a 3D space differently. I'm not great at talking about controls. It's a little hard to describe what controls feel like, and I used to avoid it as much as possible because it's so difficult. It's something that feels a little different for everyone, but then I realized it's kind of impossible not to talk about them in some circumstances. So what I can tell you honestly about Sonic World's controls is that after I got used to them, they seemed perfectly fine and I had no issue pulling off difficult maneuvers. Personally. These ice boulders are just fucking me right up. So on to my other complaints about the game. I think the one I brought up the most was that it didn't really feel like a Sonic game and that there was no sense of rhythm. But upon replaying it after learning the controls better, I can say that well, I was completely wrong, and the level design allows for a lot of ways to give the player a creative sense of rhythm depending on which character they use. I still wouldn't say the level design is on par with 3D Sonic, and they need to find more ways to make it feel organic. It feels very mechanical, the rhythm in Sonic World, not because the controls are bad or because the obstacles are bad, but because not enough of it is part of the environment. Most of it is springboards or enemies. You need some environmental platforming in there to really bring it home. And I realize that's mostly a visual thing, but the way the stages look in Sonic games is actually super important. Even the stages in Sonic 06 looked gorgeous, and that made them a lot more fun to play in than some of the stages in Sonic World. So they should look into getting some unique hazards and obstacles that play off the level's theme, because the platforming isn't bad by any means, but it doesn't feel like it really matters what level I'm on in Sonic World. It feels like you could palette swap them without much difference, which, you know, isn't good.
How do you like that, huh?
So that's 2 out of the 3 criticisms I had. I complained a little bit about how I was terrified of the controls, and I complained about how there was no sense of rhythm. Both of these criticisms were invalidated. The one about the controls, a little bit more difficult to invalidate in general, but it was invalidated by my personal experience. I personally am no longer afraid of the controls, and think the game controls okay after a bit of practice. But my complaint about the sense of rhythm, that was entirely wrong. The game has an excellent sense of rhythm, I just wish it were more organic. My third criticism is a bit of an odd one that I'm kind of embarrassed about. I talked about the scoring system in Sonic World like it was odd or different somehow from most 3D Sonic games, when that's not the case at all. In Sonic World, your score has 3 separate factors. You get scored based on how many enemies you destroy, how many rings you grab, and how fast you go. It's been this way for a majority of Sonic titles, Sonic Unleashed being an awkward exception. I also said that destroying enemies and grabbing rings took precedence in that game over going fast, which isn't necessarily true. With the 3-factor scoring system in traditional 3D Sonic games, you want 2 of the 3 checked off if you're going to get an S rank. This means that you could focus entirely on rings and enemies and ignore the timer, and you could still get an S rank. Or you could go for rings and speed, or enemies and speed, and any combination of the 3, as long as you do well with 2 of them. And it's this way in Sonic World too, so when I said that getting rings and defeating enemies took precedence over speed, what I really should have said was that it can take precedence over speed depending on how you play the game. In short, my criticism about the scoring system is also entirely invalidated, and it's very similar, if not identical, to other 3D Sonic scoring systems. Sonic Unleashed is the odd one out here. And actually, ironically, the Werehog stages in Sonic Unleashed have more in common with traditional Sonic scoring systems than the day stages do. How about that? Anyway, after getting used to Sonic World's controls, finding its sense of rhythm, and working with the scoring system instead of against it, I was very easily able to grab S ranks in a way that felt satisfying and fluid. It's a pretty good fan game, but they should work on distinguishing the levels a bit more. And that was an entire game analysis video stuffed inside the Sonic Unleashed LP during the most boring part of the game. But because I didn't drag it out unnecessarily to cover more length of the video, we still have some time left. Time that I'm going to use to drop some random Sonic trivia on your face. Trivia that is just esoteric enough that it won't appear on Sonic's Wikipedia page, but not too esoteric so that you can still find it on Google. Trivia number 1. Did you know that the Big Arms Boss Battle remix in Sonic Generations for the 3DS was composed by the band Cash Cash? Did you also know that the Big Arms Boss remix used in Sonic Generations for the 3DS is my favorite instrumental Sonic piece in all of Sonic history? Trivia number 2. Did you know that on the Japanese Sonic the Hedgehog boxes for the original Sega Genesis or Mega Drive over there were little blurbs on the front of the box that described Sonic's character and his philosophy? This was well before Sonic Adventure, where he got his first lyrical theme. In fact, I will read these blurbs to you right now. Here's the one from Sonic the Hedgehog 2. Don't just sit there and waste your precious time. When you want to do something, do it right away. Do it when you can. That's the only way to live a life without regret. And here is a far better one from the case for Sonic and Knuckles. Sonic races through green fields. The sun races through a blue sky filled with white clouds. The ways of Sonic's heart are much like the sun. Sonic runs and rests. The sun rises and sets. Don't give up on the sun. Don't make the sun laugh at you. These little blurbs on the cases cement Sonic as the most consistent character throughout all of the Sonic games, as opposed to Tails, who is the least consistent character in any video game ever. Trivia number 3. The Werehog stages are too damn long and boring. Trivia number 4. It feels way better to make incredibly irresponsible long jumps than close jumps. This is because, as discussed in a previous video, when you're jumping to a platform near you, Sonic's jumping physics can really get in the way. So making seemingly way more dangerous jumps to platforms further away is actually much preferable. Trivia number 5. There is still another Werehog stage after this.
How do you like that, huh?
Alright, so welcome to the third, is it the third or fourth? The third Werehog ice level place. This one's inside a palace. The palace has more hazard focused platforming and the stuff. You know what makes things fun? Polls. People like polls. They like to vote on shit. So put a poll on the screen. Do you think the Werehog stages are better than the Bytown Lumberjack? They're both really boring. Which is better? Vote now. Hold on. The phones are on fire. I'm getting my first submission. Just gonna put that up on the screen. Getting the first bit of feedback on this new poll. Let's see what they have to say. So anyway, I do think this level is somewhat more entertaining than the other ice levels we've seen so far as Werehog Sonic. It's not just because it was slowly building up to this temple, though that is a nice touch, but I find the platforming here to be a lot better as well. Well, maybe better isn't the word, but more entertaining. Although I have complained about the lack of momentum and how stagnant the pole-based platforming with your stretchy arms feels, they do a good job of adding hazards to that static platforming, even if the hazards are standard for the genre. In fact, this level is the only one I can recall where something can hurt you while you're on a pole and it's an active threat. Granted, you have to be staying on a specific spot on the pole, but it's still a lot more than we've seen so far. Unfortunately, the threat of this new introduction is so minimal that, well, it's just kind of a nuisance, really. You're not going to lose the level because you got frozen and fell off the pole. You'll brush it right off and get back up because it only takes a couple seconds to get back where you were and you don't really suffer a penalty from it. In fact, you lose so little health that you really probably shouldn't lose health from it in the first place. Though this does give me the opportunity to bring up, when you grab rings in the Werehog stages, it does refill your health meter. You might not have noticed that because the combat so far hasn't exactly been threatening. But any rings you see around the combat area, they're not just there to boost your score, those are supposed to be health pickups, and this becomes more apparent later in the game when we start fighting more of those giant enemies. I really enjoy this room, by the way. It's standard for the genre and its incredibly low threat, but it continues the variety that this level already had, which was a big improvement over the previous two stages. Look at that jump, look at that sick jump. And it being relatively low threat isn't a bad thing on reflection, because if there was a big bottomless pit below that scaffolding we were just platforming on, then I would be terrified, and not for good reasons, but because the controls terrify me. Actually, you know what? No. If this room we were just in, if there was a bottomless pit beneath the scaffolding, you could actually put the stretchy arm platforms and the poles all around the room, so that way you could be reckless leaping over the bottomless pit, and... You know, perspective can be a real bitch sometimes. Sometimes you think you're gonna look real cool making a sharp turn because you can't see that bottomless pit, and then you just careen right into it and look like a total dumbass while you're talking about level design. But anyway, yeah, if that room with the scaffolding, the icy scaffolding, if there was a bottomless pit, and they put a bunch of the stretchy arm platforms around the room as well, that would make it a lot more fun, because the feeling of threat would still be there, and it would seem like you're using Sonic's unique platforming abilities to get around the threat, while simultaneously ensuring there was no frustration because you didn't have to rely on the subpar basic platforming physics. It would also have the benefit of looking really good in a trailer. Platforming on icy scaffolding over a bottomless pit using Sonic's stretchy arms looks a lot more impressive than that basic platforming over icy scaffolding with no bottomless pit. I mean, sure, that jump I made was pretty sweet, but what if I made that jump and there was a bottomless pit, and at the end of the jump I grabbed onto a swingy pole and swung my way over to the icon we needed to open the door? I think that would look a lot better. And also feel a lot better and just be really cool in general. It would also better explore the stretchy arms' very lenient hit detection, because when you're platforming with the stretchy arms, the hit detection is immensely stacked in your favor, but this is rarely used creatively, and when it is used creatively, I think it might be an accident, so that would be a great opportunity to show that off. But anyway, back to what we were seeing on screen. Those blobby enemies we were throwing around, they act as time bombs. They slowly move toward us and it will explode after a short period of time, but we can also use them as projectiles to hurt other enemies, which made these two mini-bosses a lot easier to tackle. So that's actually really good design, because those two bosses by themselves, without the blobby exploding enemies, would be kinda tough. It's a situation where the game rewards you for thinking strategically, even if the strategy is incredibly, incredibly basic.
How do you like that, huh?
Oh no!
You know, I actually feel super bad for the Werehog bosses in this game. The day stage bosses aren't exactly stellar, but there's more to them than this, on average. For example, for the Dark Moray boss, you just have to whack these generators until the shield goes down, and then get up and whack the Dark Moray itself. There are some minor nuances, but it's nothing you wouldn't expect, you know, it's something that comes standard. Eventually, the generators will reappear and make the shield come back, for example. I'm sure you already saw that coming. That's not really something worth pointing out. And it's true that the Dark Moray has a few different moves at his disposal. One of them knocks us off the platform, but unfortunately for the Dark Moray, we don't actually need to try to avoid them. We can get hit by every single attack the Dark Moray throws at us, and just keep on mashing the square button after we get back up. There's seriously no punishment for this, especially with these rings lying around to heal us. So to summarize, we can beat this boss fight just by mashing the square button. Sure, you mash the square button on the generators before you mash the square button on the boss itself, but there's no thought required here. Destroying generators to lower a shield is such a common trope that I didn't even think about it. I was just like, oh look, generators, and my subconscious took over. And I really don't think it's too much to ask for a boss's attacks to damage you a decent amount. The Dark Moray deals so little damage with its attacks that it's not a real threat at all. I mean, look at that. This may as well be Baby's first boss battle, there's just so little here to get into. I do recall saying the Dark Phoenix wasn't a great boss either, but you had to think more than this. This is just button mashing. And it's true, in the Dark Phoenix boss there was also very little threat of ever failing, but in spite of that there was a puzzle element involved. Destroying generators to lower a shield, I don't think that counts as a puzzle element. Oh look, the The Dark Moray is trying to shoot balls of energy at me. Isn't that cute? I'm sure they won't ever hit because they're really easy to dodge and pose no threat. If the balls of energy hit the platform, they freeze parts of the platform, and if you run into the frozen ice, it hurts a little bit, but who cares? You're probably not even gonna notice that. You're probably just gonna keep smacking it.
How do you like that, huh?